My hair's a big mess. That's why I have a hat on indoors like a moron.
Oh, that's okay. And welcome to the Keeping the Nostalgia Alive show. I am your host, Billy Powell. Today with us is author Clayton Trutor. Clayton Trutor holds a PhD in U.S. history from Boston College, teaches at Norwich University in Northfield, Vermont. He writes about college football and basketball for SB Nation. Trutor is also the Vermont State Chairman of the Society for American Baseball Research, the SABR, and is a regular contributor to the SABR Biography Project. But what we're going to chat about today with my friend is Boston Ball, the Rick Pitino, Jim Calhoun, Gary Williams, and the Forgotten Cradle of Basketball at Boston Ball. It's a fabulous book, a great book. I always thought the Cradle of Basketball was the state of Indiana. Clayton, can you tell me why the Cradle of Basketball is up in the Boston area, and where did you get the idea for this book, and tell us about the process?
Well, I think Indiana is the cradle of basketball. I think Boston, in a particular time, is the forgotten cradle of basketball coaches. I got the idea. I went to graduate school at Boston College, and I'm a lifelong basketball junkie. So if I was bored on a winter night, I went to any of the many colleges in the area, would go to college basketball games. And it occurred to me that three Hall of Fame coaching careers, Jim Calhoun at Northeastern, Rick Pitino at Boston University, and Gary Williams at Boston College, all began at roughly the same time in the same city, and nobody had really written about it, including those three coaches. They've all done memoirs, autobiographies, and they barely talk about it. Calhoun spends a chapter and a half on his 14 years at Northeastern, which came right before he went to UConn. Rick Pitino spends like 4 pages on his 5 years at Boston University, and Gary Williams spends like 5 pages on his 4 years at BC. So I figured it was a subject that required a little more scrutiny. And the pandemic proved the perfect time to go into it. I finished my first book, which is about Atlanta, right as the pandemic got going, and a lot of people sitting around and at home and stuff. And it was a great time to call people up to interview them. I knocked out like 95 interviews in 3 months as a result of it, and that's what really got the book going so quickly.
And the name of that book was Loserville, right?
Yep,
About
yep.
how, and tell everybody a little bit about that book.
Yeah, my first book, Loserville, How Professional Sports Remade Atlanta and How Atlanta Remade Pro Sports, is about Atlanta's pursuit of major league teams in the 1960s. They get a lot of teams really quickly, and it doesn't quite go as expected. Rather than being this kind of cure-all for the city's ills, as the city leaders actually talked about it, they didn't talk about it simply as being a way to have some new things to enjoy. They talked about it as this thing that's going to bring people together in Atlanta. It didn't really work out that way. And in part, it's because they had such a glut of teams so quickly. And it's not like people there weren't interested in sports already. They were interested in college football and stock car racing and golf and all kinds of other things, and didn't just cease to be interested in those because the Braves and Falcons and everybody else came to town. So it's sort of a cautionary tale. This is more of a fun book, my second book on college basketball.
Where did you get this? You majored in history. I graduated from Indiana State University in 1990 with a history degree. Where did you get this love of history? And then where did you get the love of history of, baseball, basketball? How did it turn from history to the history of athletics?
Well, for whatever reason, my family's always been interested in history. But since I was a little kid, my mom and dad both read pretty voraciously. Neither of them have a 4 year degree, but they read a lot of history and read a lot of other serious stuff, and it was always something that interested me. I had a grandma who ran the history museum, or like a small town history museum, historical society. So that was always a part of my life. We'd go visit there on Sundays, not infrequently. And when I was 7 years old, my brother and I got a set of encyclopedias from one of our neighbors. He was a door-to-door encyclopedia salesman, and my mom bought a set of encyclopedias from Mr. Sullivan, and my brother and I would bring them to bed for many years. We just go read about Gambia, or we'd read about Albert Schweitzer, or whatever we'd flip to that night. And it just made us interested in history. And I majored in history. I have a PhD in it. My brother is a history PhD as well. And I think it's really because of, my grandma and those encyclopedias and my parents being interested in it throughout my life.
And for those people listening and watching, the Encyclopedia Britannicas was what happened before the internet.
No doubt. Oh, it was way better. I actually think it was way more mysterious just flipping through. The other thing is we got these encyclopedias in 1989. So they had very intense discussions of like the structure of the East German and Soviet and Romanian governments and stuff that disappeared like a year later. So they were like the most, like a 1989 set of encyclopedias was about the most instantly dated set because all of this stuff about the Eastern Bloc was immediately anachronistic. So they're kind of fun in that respect too.
Um, in this, where did you get the idea to do this? What was the light bulb that flipped above your head and said, you know what, I'm going to write this book? And how difficult was it to get Jim Calhoun, Rick Pitino, Gary Williams all to give their input? And did you have fun gathering all that information?
I mean, the idea probably occurred to me about 10 years ago. In part, it's because I'm going to these college games in Boston and realizing these coaches are all there. I also read a book by John Feinstein, who, of course, wrote Season on the Brink about Indiana basketball. He wrote another book called The Legends Club, which was about essentially the rivalry among Dean Smith, Jim Valvano, and Coach K in North Carolina in the 80s and 90s. And this idea of a bunch of good coaches being in the same place at the same time, I sort of took that concept and applied that to what was happening in Boston in roughly the same time. So his book was a huge inspiration on mine, at least structurally. And structurally, I in many ways imitated a lot of the ways he had like a chapter about one coach and then a chapter about another coach and kind of building the narrative forward. I certainly made use of that as an example. In terms of can you repeat the second part of the question? I got thinking about that book and
oh no, that's okay. How much help or how much input did you receive from Jim Calhoun, Gary Williams, Rick Pitino, and were they happy to do it?
I was unable to talk to Rick Pitino. I had about 10 different people ask him to for me. It just didn't happen. He was in the middle of transitioning from Iona to St. John's, certainly. He's also had some run-ins with the press over his years, so I assume he was a little gun-shy is a distinct possibility, too. I mean, the most recent book before mine that dealt with him, the Michael Sokolov book, was not nearly as charitable as mine in respects to his career, so I can see why some writers are showing up he might have been a little hesitant to. Calhoun was wonderful to talk to. I mean, he's an Irish guy from Boston, so he certainly has the gift of gab. I mean, we chatted like 2 hours. After about 10 minutes, it seemed like you're sitting next to your old buddy at the bar at the Elks Club, just shooting the breeze with him. He was just a great guy to talk to. Gary Williams is a very notably intense guy, as everybody says about him. When you interview people, what's Gary Williams like? They always pause and go, "He's intense." Then they pause again, and then they try to formulate their thoughts. But he was, after about a 5 minute kind of little rough start, we really had a nice hour-long conversation about many of the players he had over time. I mean, Gary Williams, I think, was the second person I interviewed for the book. I sent a request into the University of Maryland to get in contact with him. That's a lot of times, if guys were still associated with a particular school, I'd email the athletic department and see if I could get in touch with them. Like within 2 hours of emailing it, yeah, Gary'd love to talk to you tomorrow. I mean, it's incredible. Some people you don't hear from for months. Maryland, was apparently sitting around waiting for my email and put me in touch with him. And he really was great to talk to and very helpful. Calhoun was with, he coached a little bit at a Division III school called the University of St. Joseph's in Connecticut a few years back. And they very quickly put me in touch with him too. So they were both, I talked to both of them very easily. Talking to the Pitino was, I put a lot of effort into it, but it just didn't happen. And the players loved to. I mean, I talked with like over 20 players from each program, so it was really easy to get a hold of players from this time period to talk to. I mean, guys, a lot of people love talking about their glory days, and they certainly had those in all three of these teams, which each made the tournament under these coaches.
It's really exciting when we, especially as historians, both of us, that when you do get that nibble and they want to talk to you, you're just like so excited. For example, though, I tried my hardest while Coach Bob Knight was alive. I was really good friends with Mary Ann Davis, who was his executive assistant for 32 years. And 3 or 4 times in a 2-year period, she said, well, Coach said, submit your questions and he'll let you know whether or not he's going to let you do an interview. And all 3 times I submitted questions, she said, well, no, he came back, said they were all dumb. So, so that intensity with Calhoun and Williams and not being able to talk to Pitino, I understand that. But as historians, doing this stuff just brings a smile to my face. Clayton, where can they get the book? And can they still get the book on Atlanta sports?
Oh yeah, that book is, I mean, those books are both still widely available. I mean, if you go to Amazon, you can get either of them. I mean, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, any of the major online book retailers will have both books. I have a promo code your readers can use though to save a bunch of money on the book. If they go to bit.ly/Boston Ball, bit.ly like the way people shorten website addresses, bit.ly/Boston Ball, all one word, and they use promo code what is that promo code? They use promo code 6HLW23, 6HLW23. They can save 50% of the book between now and the end of the year. You can also get it for a little bit more money on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and the like. But yeah, if you go to bit.ly/Boston Ball, promo code 6HLW23, you can save a bunch of money on the book right now.
How do you pick the topics of your books? And do you have, and I know we're just talking, Boston Ball is just out, and I know I'm probably putting the cart before the horse, but how do you pick your topics? And do you have one that you're kind of working in right now that's in the chute?
Well, I have an agent, and I regularly shoot ideas for books by him, and he's like, "Well, I don't think people are interested in that, or they might be interested in this other thing." And so I have a few different possibilities going on right now for ideas. I tend to want, when I look for an idea for a book, and my first book is a product of my doctoral dissertation, so it comes out of that. My second, I mean, and this is, I think this is true of both books, though. I try to look for something that happened in the past that sort of seems small at the time that ended up having this much broader influence. So you take a little thing in Atlanta wanting to be a big league city, and I tease it out to talking how it had an impact on the way most cities had to deal with trying to get sports. I mean, the whole kind of stadium game that exists between cities competing over teams by offering public financing for them really comes out of what Atlanta does in the 1960s, rolling out the red carpet, saying, "We'll finance your stadium." It kind of put, whether you had a team or you didn't have a team, it puts your city in kind of a bad position because everybody had to be willing to roll out the red carpet to keep teams. I mean, the leagues very quickly realized that there were other cities like Atlanta that were willing to do that had to do what it, were willing to do what it took to get pro sports. So it recreated the sports landscape. In terms of this book, you have three coaches coaching before basically small fan bases. BC had a pretty good fan base because they were in the Big East, but it was basically just their alumni and their students. Like, the state of Massachusetts as a whole doesn't embrace Boston College unless you're particularly associated with it. It's not like it's Indiana or Wisconsin, that it's the state university and people throughout the state follow the team. It's basically people with an association with this particular private Catholic school that are interested in it. They had some support. BU and Northeastern played to tiny crowds for much of this era. Not exclusively. Northeastern did better at the end, attendance-wise, once Reggie Lewis is there in the 1980s. But BU, Rick Pitino, there were 200 people at games that Rick Pitino coached. There were 500 people at games that were Pitino versus Calhoun. You could just hear the two of them yelling in the gym. Like, there's nobody there. There's not that many people interested. Boston's kind of a weird college town in that respect, in that it's not like Bloomington, Indiana, or Madison, Wisconsin, or Ann Arbor, where there's one college that is the focus of everything going on in town. It's a college town in the sense that it's a big city that has a lot of fairly small colleges in it. So no one of them is the dominant force in the sporting landscape. And you certainly see that with Calhoun and Pitino. I mean, Pitino in particular would be standing out on streets, handing out flyers saying, "Come to my game," like he had a garage band.
What was it when you were growing up? I know we're not old, but when you were growing up, what did you follow Boston College? Did your family go to Boston College? Did you have a love for for basketball in the state of Massachusetts, or did you follow any other college basketball teams?
I mean, probably the college basketball team I followed the most as a kid was Notre Dame. I mean, I was a Notre Dame fan, football fan. I mean, grew up Catholic, Notre Dame football fan, followed them in basketball, Digger Phelps era, into John McLeod and all that kind of stuff. I followed the University of Vermont. I'm wearing a hat of right now. That's where I went to my undergraduate education. And I just loved college basketball as a whole. I mean, baseball was probably my favorite sport as a kid. I think football might actually be my favorite sport now. But I wrote a book about basketball, and I write for the Hockey News, so I kind of do everything but football, really, in terms of my writing. But yeah, I followed college basketball very broadly. And in terms of my interest in BC, it didn't really happen until I ended up going to graduate school there. I mean, they were really, really bad for a lot of the time period I was there. When they had Al Skinner as their coach in like the 2010s, they went to the tournament a bunch of years in a row, but they've had about a 15-year dry spell. I mean, I was a season ticket holder in a season when BC went 0-16 in the ACC. I mean, there were 700 or 800 people at these ACC games sometimes. I mean, if Louisville or somebody came to town, there'd be a really big crowd. But to see them play on a Tuesday night against Georgia Tech or something, there was not these teeming crowds at the games. Like, I would like the guys in the team knew who I was because I was a regular at the games. There were not a ton of them in some of those time periods, like 2014, 2015 kind of thing. So there were some very lean times, but I went just because I lived nearby and I liked basketball, so I'd go to the game.
Were you any good at baseball or basketball as a little tyke?
I am a very mediocre athlete. I mean, I played varsity football, and I was kind of a mediocre player on kind of a mediocre team. And in terms of baseball, I played varsity baseball. I sat on the bench. My team actually made it to the state championship game. Mostly, I just stole the other kids' Powerade, and I could keep score pretty well, and I knew a lot about trivia, and I got along with the coaches. But yeah, I'm a very at best mediocre athlete. I'm much better at baseball trivia than the actual playing of the game.
Speaking from, I wasn't very good at sports either. And I sat on the bench in a lot of sports too. But I think that helped me with my love of history and soaking up everything that went on in the game, rather than because I was playing or out on the field or out on the court. I took everything in from a different perspective than someone who plays all the time. You probably feel the same way.
I think that's true too. I think drinking all those sugary beverages are how I ended up with diabetes, but
No, I got bored one time and I decided to put one of those salt pills inside my lip. And,
really.
I just thought I was cool. So, and nope, that didn't work either. So Clayton, tell us again how you can get the book.
Boston Ball as well as Louisville are available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the online retailers. If you go to bit.ly/Boston Ball and use promo code 6HLW23, you can save 50% on the book between now and the end of the year. If you check me out on social media, I'm at Clayton Trutor on Twitter, or whatever they're calling it these days. Clayton Trutor on Facebook. You let me know. Oh, X, that's what it is. I keep forgetting that. I gotta remember to call it X. If you look me up on social media and you bought the book, just send me a message and I'll happily mail you a book plate signed with whatever you want on it as thanks. Well, I mean, anything,
Yeah, of course.
that you could say in polite company, anything you say in polite company. Yeah.
And the name of the book is Boston Ball: Rick Pitino, Jim Calhoun, Gary Williams, and the Forgotten Cradle of Basketball Coaches. Clayton Trutor, thank you so much. I know we've been playing phone tag. I know you got a couple other routes you're going to go for publicity for your book. I appreciate it. I hope everyone will take a little time and look up Boston Ball. Check out its reviews, great reviews. Pick up a copy. I know I did mine. And thank you very much, Clayton.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Happy to come on anytime and shoot the breeze.
And just to make sure that really the moral of this interview is that basketball was really invented and perfected in Indiana, correct?
Absolutely. Without question. Yeah, I'll write that. I'll write that on page 1 of the next book, even if it's about hockey.
What's really kind of really neat though is that Rick Pitino was a nemesis of Coach Knight when he was at UK. Jim Calhoun, UConn beat Bobby Knight. Normally had Bobby Knight's number. Gary Williams, we would have 6 banners at Indiana University if Gary Williams wasn't coaching Maryland in 2002 and beat Mike Davis and the Hoosiers. So there's a lot of 6 degrees of separation in your book, and I think a lot of people from the state of Indiana or people who just love the game of basketball are really going to enjoy it. So thanks again, Clayton.
And Calhoun had a very good relationship with Bobby Knight. There was a great deal of mutual respect between them. I mean, Calhoun credits Knight with getting the job he did at UConn because he said to him, don't take a job at some directional school with a state name after it in the Midwest. Wait for a state university, so you're the flagship, that there's money behind you. I mean, he almost took the job at Northwestern, and he's like, Northwestern's never going to win. Don't take that job. They're not committed to winning. Wait till a flagship university does, and like 2 weeks later, UConn calls up. He's got a flagship state university. He goes there, and the rest is history.
And a great coach, all of them. great coaches. Clayton Trutor, thank you so much. The name of the book is Boston Ball. Check it out. Google it. Get it. Clayton, enjoy.
My pleasure. Merry Christmas.